Welcome to the year 2008, where you had your Xbox 360 for a few years and you played the original Ninja Gaiden, but at the very end of your OG Xbox lifespan, you're itching for just a little bit more. Then the release of the heavily anticipated Ninja Gaiden 2 releases. It comes out and gets an 81 on Metacritic, meaning that it's mostly lived up to the original and it's mostly fantastic. So when booting up the Ninja Gaiden II Black remaster that came out recently, I was initially transported to this time in my life where I personally didn't own an Xbox 360, but my cousins did. They allowed me to play through some of their games that I wasn't normally allowed to or just didn't own because I didn't have that console. I loved being able to play through the original game and some of the other original Xbox games that came out at that time and when I went over to their house every couple of weeks. So playing through this game really had me reflecting on my past and just remembering how great games are, but how far we've come. This game is in the same vein as many other remasters that we've received recently, that it's mostly the same game but with some fancy graphics slapped on top of it. So other than that, it's pretty much the same across the board. According to what I've read online, this is mostly based upon the Sigma release of the game, which has a reduced number of enemies, less random projectiles thrown at you, but the enemies have quite a bit more health. And I could be wrong on this, so forgive me if I am, but either way, let's go ahead and get started on this review of Ninja Gaiden II Black. This game's story starts off with Ryu coming to save a woman who's been running around town asking for where Ryu is. She gets kidnapped by some enemies and you go to save her. But after we save her, she warns us that our village is about to be attacked or currently being attacked. So we get there and we find our father fighting a bunch of bad guys, and well, there's a demon statue involved that we normally protect, but now it's being stolen. So after it does get stolen, after a failed attempt to keep it with us, then we get whisked away to random parts of the world, tracking down in an attempt to retrieve it. But as we span this entire globe just hunting down and trying to find the statue, it continues to get more and more absurd and just absolutely crazy as it goes throughout the game and the story. You go from fighting ninjas to motherfucking demons. By the end of it, you're fighting demons in basically hell in a grotesque environment that's just dramatically different from the skyscrapers in the cities that you initially started the game in. But as we all know, the story is not going to be the biggest focus here. I was not necessarily engaged by it, but it was okay, pretty meh for the most part. But truly, as you all know, this is not about the story, so we don't really care. So let's get into the part that we do care about, and that's going to be the combat and gameplay. Third-person, action, slice and dice combat is what it's all about, baby. Not only are we here to kick some ass and take some names, but we're gonna be stylish while we fucking do it, okay? Ryu has always been this cool and slick dude that's got this vibe about him. He's got this prowess in combat that just reflects in his aesthetics even more so. He's more methodical in his movement, but he always considers who and where to attack because it really does matter in this game. If you go into this just smashing random buttons on your controller, then you're gonna probably die. You have to choose your fights and choose the enemies to kill in a specific order because it does really matter. If you don't kill the important enemies first, then you're gonna have a bad time. You start off with a very simple sword and throwing knives, but you quickly obtain a massive arsenal of melee weapons and a few ranged weapons to come with it. But this game is about being a fucking ninja. You get in there and you just mix people up. It's not a shooter. So as you go throughout the story, you collect this arsenal of weapons of staff, claws, dual swords, scythe, tonfas, and many more. Honestly, there was so many that I kind of lost track and I stopped using all of them because my favorite by far was the staff. It allowed me to be quick and agile while doing a good bit of damage and keeping my movement up while also juggling characters all the time. It was a perfect mix of how I wanted to play the game. I did randomly swap to other weapons throughout my time with the game just to test them out for a little bit, but staff was by far my most used weapon, and the combat felt smooth with it. Ryu is a little bit stiff sometimes in his movements because he's built similar to a tank. Like, first of all, that boy thick as shit. But second of all, I like to think of him as moving similar to the early Resident Evil games where you can't move and shoot at the same time, because this game does not have any sort of hard or soft lock on for enemies. So you really need to know where you're going, who you're going to attack, and what you're going to do when you get there. Because if you end up pressing buttons randomly or not really paying attention, then you're going to end up in a corner somewhere spinning in a circle 10 to 15 away from the closest enemy. And then they're going to counterattack you, because the enemies in this are pretty clever for the most part. They will attack you with multiple different techniques at the same time. They'll grab you, they'll hit you with ranged attacks, and they're not afraid to all jump on you at the same fucking time. Where you go on fighting 6 to 8 dudes at the same time, all using different things, you're gonna have to pick one off to not get overwhelmed. And you also get access to some special techniques that utilize pretty much mana, but it's ninpo, which is these magical based attacks that can help you out in a pinch or to kind of clear a room a little bit. Now, I personally did not utilize these a ton, but I did pull them out whenever I feel like I could use them best, and otherwise I stuck to my bread and butter combos of slashing and slicing and dicing, leaving piles of blood and limbs everywhere, you know what I'm saying? Because that's right, this game is bloody and gory, and as you kill enemies, blood will just fly across the screen, limbs will come off, and yet the enemies will just keep fighting. It's fucking cool. They'll crawl on the floor at you, and they'll just move a little bit slower because they're missing a leg, or maybe they'll hit you with one arm because the other one's fucking chopped off. And that alone is unique even in today's gaming landscape, where we don't really have a lot of dynamic enemy dismemberment, and especially not in a character action game like this. Those are usually resorted to horror games or zombies. I really did enjoy the variety of enemies in this game, where they have a multitude of different weapons and styles of attack, where they mix and match them to where you can kind of pick and choose your style of combat based upon what you're going up against. So let's move on to progression here, which is mostly just you upgrading your max health and ninpo, which again is just pretty much mana, but you also gain a currency that you can use to buy consumables or upgrade your weapons, allowing them to do just a little bit more damage, but also gain a new visual design that makes it look a little bit more badass. Now, I know this game is older, but it would be nice to have just a little bit more than that. Give me a new combo here and there, maybe a status effect. But remember, again, it's a game from 2008. They were not focused on anything other than making a tight and slick combat system with this thick-ass ninja named Ryu. Because outside of gaining new weapons and ninpo and upgrading your existing weapons, there's not much else for progression here. So for me, it felt a little bit lacking, and I would have liked to see just a little bit more. That way I could kind of defer and change my approach to combat, maybe with certain types of enemies, and maybe just got a little bit more stronger over time. And then since this is an older game, the size and the scale of the zones and the environments are nothing too fancy. The environments themselves, due to this remaster, are fantastically done. They're mostly gorgeous, with great textures across the board. Most of the game is going to be taking you through a pretty linear corridor with some slightly open areas for combat throughout, but you quickly maneuver through them, and you don't really get a lot of time to sit there and smell the roses. But the game isn't really about that. It's not meant to be the most breathtaking or graphically intensive. You're meant to cut people in fucking half and run on walls. Which, when you do that, it looks amazing, which is all that really matters. When you're completing these feats of strength and skill, it doesn't really go outside of the box with art style, and it sticks super close to the original's look, but that makes it perfectly fine in my eyes. All in all, the game looks great, but every once in a while it can seem a little bland because it is an older game, but that's okay with me. And for the sound design of this game, we have some okay voice acting, nothing that's going to blow your socks off or impress you that much, but the sounds of the enemies, the world, the fighting and combat are all crunchy. The background music is always a vibe. It gets mixed in perfectly with combat that just keeps you going when you're exploring or dicing up dudes. Other than that, the clean sound design and the rest of the game is mostly okay. And again, the game is older, it's a remaster, and viewing it through that lens as something that's almost 20 years old makes me a bit more forgiving. And before I wrap up this pretty short review, I do want to take a moment to mention some of these side characters with these women and the difficulty that other people mention almost any time that Ninja Gaiden gets brought up. So with these women in these side stories, you take a moment to retread some of these same previous zones that Ryu has already gone through. but with some sexy, busty women with unique skills and weapons. It's not bad. Some of them are honestly pretty badass, and some of them are just okay for the most part. It did help break up the game in the combat, but I wasn't the biggest fan of these, and repeating the same zones just felt so samey. I had already experienced them with my boy Ryu, and they could have shook it up just a little bit more, but they stuck it safe, and it was just okay because of that. And the last part with the difficulty, this game to me was not all that difficult. I did play it on normal, of course, but some of the bosses gave me a little bit of a hard time. Maybe I had to fight them and I died 5 to 10 times, maybe for a handful of the bosses, but not that many of them caused me to die more than once, maybe twice, and then I don't think I ever died to normal mobs, or if I did, it was a one-off. I remember these games back in the day being quite a bit harder, but this game felt quite a bit easier than I remembered, which to me isn't really a bad thing. I enjoyed running through these enemies and playing around with my different combos and weapons, juggling them up and blending them all together. Overall, I do think Ninja Gaiden II Black is probably the best way to experience the game. During my time with it, I only had maybe 1 or 2 very minor bugs where I got like glitched into the environment and I could kind of work my way out of it, or other little tiny things that weren't game breaking. But the game looks amazing. It felt smooth, and it felt just like the original. So go out and get this game if you love the original Ninja Gaiden games and you kind of want to relive the old days. You will not be disappointed with this, especially if you're coming at it knowing that it is an older game just with a new coat of paint on it. As long as you understand that coming into it, you're gonna have a blast. Be mindful as well that there is a new Ninja Gaiden coming out, and that we've also got Onimusha, we got Assassin's Creed Shadows, Ghost of Yote. We are swimming in ninjas and samurais, and I fucking love it. That shit's amazing. I hope they keep it up with all these badass samurai and ninjas that we're getting all the time nowadays, because that's some of my favorite shit. But either way, that's gonna be it for this. But as always, with all the YouTube stuff, like and subscribe, comment down below about how terrible I am at these games, or what do you want to see me play next? But either way, that's going to be it for me, and I'll see you next time.